My name is Mario. I'm 32 years old. I was a Jehovah's Witness, and I am shunned.
All right, Mario. So how did you come to be one of Jehovah's Witnesses in the first place? Were you born in?
So basically, you could say I was born in. I had a great grandfather that actually was in my mother's ear while she was pregnant with me and got her trying to think critically about the future and the way of the world. And he kind of got in her head that way. You need to think about your son now, the world he's going to grow up in, the hope, and started. So that's how basically my mother got into it. Then, slowly, my father, and he started studying, and, they were studying. And that's how they came to find out about it.
That's an interesting point, because I think there are a lot of people that get interested in it when they're having a child. Sometimes it's their first, and maybe a later child as well. But I think having a child is a big moment in somebody's life. It makes them feel vulnerable. They start thinking about things maybe in different ways, and then if they're exposed in some way to Jehovah's Witnesses and the surety that Jehovah's Witnesses offer, the certainty. This whole life is mapped out. I think it makes people feel a little more comfortable sometimes.
And not only that, the way they pitch it with how curriculum and organized it looks with all the books and the literature. It really, the way she would describe it to me was that they they studied other religions and they poured over books, and this was the truth. This was obvious that it was the truth, and that's the way it was explained to me.
Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. They make it sound like they've done all the research, they have all the things in place. So all you have to do is bring your neat little new family right in, and you'll fit in, you'll assimilate, and you'll be happy and healthy, which is what everybody wants for their kids, right? We all, anyone who has a child wants their kid to grow up happy and healthy, and Witnesses kind of promise that. So, that's kind of a way to draw people in, of course, and we'll talk about that's not always the case.
Definitely not.
As we've talked about in all these stories. So, for yourself, you were pretty much then born in, it's all you really knew. What was the worldview that the religion gave you? How did it make you see people around you?
I just want to there's like a huge part of the story. Like early on, when my father was studying, on his way, he had a car wreck on his way to study, and my father passed away when I was very young. And that's a huge part of the story, because after that, my mother went full force into the organization after it was only the three of us left. So yeah, that's definitely a huge part of the story that I wanted to mention.
Absolutely. How old were you?
I was 5.
Whew.
And my brother was around 2 or 3. Wow. I want to say.
That's really rough on everybody. And certainly you can see where that would, maybe even the resurrection hope or whatever the case may be, might lead a person to get even deeper into it. Again, a vulnerable person searching for certainty, searching for something that they feel is stable in their life when things have changed so drastically.
Definitely.
So that happened when you were 5. How did you notice life change around that time, or because the question about like how did it make you see the world, before you're 5 years old, I don't know how much we remember about how we really see the world. Sometimes we remember things, but how were you seeing life, with all this going on?
I just remember like the computer, like my mind, like booting up after that point in my life. Like there was a lot of change at that time. both of my grandparents lived like in very close proximity to each other in the same, like on the same street. So then we lived with in my paternal grandparents' house. So then after my father passed, we moved with my maternal grandparents, and then we later moved towns. And I remember that was when, you know, all that change going on. Just a lot of change. And
yeah, that, I mean, like the change was already hard.
yeah,
You know, now there's more change thrown on top of it. That's a lot for a 5-year-old kid.
definitely. And then, you know, by the time I got to first grade, starting in this new town, I remember it vividly. And then that was when the whole, oh, I have to sit down with your teacher to tell them what you can and can't do with the tract. I remember that's where the first time where I remember, like, this is your new life now as a Jehovah's Witness, you know, just this reboot of sorts.
How'd you feel when, you know, your mom went in and did that? Were you present when she went in there with the tract, or did you just
I
hear
think
about
it was a meeting with the principal. Then they kind of passed the information down to the teacher, and the teacher was really, really nice about it. I remember the Pledge of Allegiance was a big thing. I don't know why they would do it, but I would have to every day get up and go to the back of the classroom and like sit at this table by myself while everybody said the Pledge of Allegiance. And then they used to sing a song after, like, God Bless America. I remember, like, in first grade, and you know, I used to have to sit through that. And then I remember wanting to be patriotic because we come from an immigrant family, and you know, the way my grandparents described like coming to this country and that whole story, it's like if you listen to it, it'll bring a tear to your eye. And I remember really wanting to be like, oh, you know, this is my country, and not being able to convey that because you're one of Jehovah's Witnesses and you have to be different in every single way.
Yeah, wow. We had the Pledge of Allegiance in school, but I don't think we ever sang a song afterward. That's tough. And making you sit in the back. I remember I was often made to sit outside the classroom. Like, I'd have to leave the classroom, go out in the hall, and then, you know, come back in and face all the kids and the teacher every morning, you know, like some sort of weirdo that, you know, emerged from the depths of the hallway every day.
Yeah, the kid with the weird religion. That's basically what how you're labeled.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, really, what kid doesn't want to stand out as different? You know? Yeah.
When you're in those it's really hard in those when you're developing, and you know and then to throw this different set of ideology and different set of beliefs that stands like really on the opposite spectrum of everyone else, it's tough.
So let's talk about that then. Your life as a young Jehovah's Witness at school. Obviously, this was a bad start to your days. How did you feel at school? Did you, like, I know you said that you kind of realized that, you know, my mom is coming in with the tract, and now, you know, things are getting real here. Did you feel different than the other kids? You know, even though, I mean, like, you have one thing here that makes you feel different, but did you feel different otherwise, or were you able to make friends?
Elementary school, I had these, you know, a couple little friends. I mean, I remember that first grade phase or second grade, my mom and my aunts threw a little party for like the little kids in my class, like not a birthday party, not anything, but like, I remember I had them over and it was like super cool. And I remember that. Things would change later on. But I remember that early childhood phase when it was just the three of us. It was happy in the sense that there was the Jehovah's Witness stuff, and you'd have to go to the meetings and you have to preach, but it wasn't that bad because, as it gets real when you get into your teenage years. And once you start, developing within that realm of the religion and the structure. But I remember it, not being so hardcore when I was a little kid. And I remember, being encouraged to learn. I remember I became an unbaptized publisher at like 8 years old. So I remember doing that, and like my, not only were we in it, but my maternal grandparents were in it. So we used to go to the meetings with them. My other aunts, we lived with them, but they weren't in it. And it, that was how it was. Like my mother and then my grandparents, like, and my brother going to the meetings. And it was doable then, like how it was at that point.
Yeah. And so at that point, did you enjoy at all going out and, like, as a kid, I think some kids do enjoy going out in field service. They're going out and, I don't know, knocking on doors. It probably feels special for you. Did you enjoy any of the witness activity as a little kid?
As a little kid, before me having to talk at the door, yeah, I guess it wasn't terrible. I mean, I didn't like doing it, like getting up on Saturday mornings. It's a tough thing for a kid. Everybody talks about those Saturday morning cartoons. So then Monday you go in, you have nothing to talk about with your classmates because I did a bunch of weird stuff on the weekend. Dressed in a suit, doing, oh, didn't I see you on the street, and stuff like that, and that's always rough one.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you have, when you were growing up, in your younger years, before things changed, did you have other kids at the Kingdom Hall your age to be friends with?
I remember we became close with this other, they were Cuban too, so there was like that in common. And we were friends with that one boy. But growing up, my mother would later remarry. And he was an elder. And I remember being very isolated from everybody, even within the organization, because there's like levels. And I remember it was just me and my brother. The fortunate thing is I had a brother close in age, and I had a constant play date, fight mate, whatever it was that day. We were just brothers together. Brothers, brothers and sisters, they fight. But lucky enough, I couldn't imagine being an only child and then having to not be able to be friends with anyone and live that lifestyle.
Yeah, very isolating. It does help if you have a sibling, somebody that you can turn to and have as a friend in that situation. You kind of alluded to it, but obviously things change. Is there anything else you want to talk about in your younger childhood before we kind of get to when things start to change?
I remember, and it's a story I've shared with you, when I gave my first talk, I was about 6 or 7. I was really young. I couldn't reach up to the podium. And I would later, moving forward, give a lot more talks. But I remember that fear. And I remember the first step onto the stool, the brown drab stool that they used to, everything was like drab colors. So you jump up and it was like a tree limb snap, like, and getting up there and just seeing the whole congregation like, oh man. And I remember that. And it was back when you had to come up with a number. The number 2 was a 5-minute speech with, it wasn't just reading. So I remember that, the fear of that. And then, I remember the whole, everybody used to allude, little Timothy, he's just so spiritual. Look at him. He's so spiritual. And, walking around like a little old man with my, suit,
I think that's
slinging watchtowers.
That's a good point. Little Timothy, or walking around like an old man, a little old man. I think they force you to grow up really fast. And who of us doesn't remember our first talk? Standing there just absolutely petrified in front of a group of people, and it's like, so I was, I think, 8 or 9 when my parents became witnesses. So I can't remember exactly when my first talk was at this point. Maybe it was 10. I don't know, probably somewhere in there. But I was tall enough to not have to do the stool thing. But I remember, like my younger brothers having to get up on a stool. to give their first talks. And there's just something about seeing a little child have to get up there and give a talk from the Bible, with, like you said, the number two at the time wasn't just a reading. So you had to, like make points and instruct people. And it's super weird when you really think about it, that there are, like 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds at times, or 10-year-olds even giving Bible talks, instructing the congregation about something that they clearly didn't probably write on their own. It's, you see that the programming and how it starts at that age.
Yeah, it's definitely indoctrination. It's definitely they teach it so it runs in the background at all times. And not only that, one of the first times you see one of those crazy illustrations about the end of the world, when you're a really little kid, I wouldn't dream about doing that to one of my young cousins. Like, hey, look at this picture of the world getting destroyed and cars getting swallowed into the street. Like, it's just, I wouldn't dream of doing that to a kid or telling them anything about that.
Yeah, that's a great aspect of propaganda. Using information at extremes, and these illustrations, these weren't pictures or photographs. These were illustrations. These were the things they dreamt up in their mind to use to control people. The fear that they inculcate, witness term, into their little children from a young age, that if you don't follow us, the sky's going to turn blood red or orange, and the earth's going to open up and swallow you and everybody else. That's a terrifying image to a child. And I mean, there are people who, as adults, are still terrified, have nightmares about these things because of the trauma of being exposed to these types of imagery as a child, knowing, because children have a hard enough time telling what's real and what's fake anyway. Little kids believe cartoons are real at times. But Jehovah's Witnesses think this is real, and they're promoting it as real from day one. And that's really tough on the psychology of a child. So yeah, it's something that a lot of people really deal with. So now you've made it through the younger years. You've got this indoctrination already starting. But then things do start to change for you. How does that kind of start to happen?
Well, right around, we had always grown up as that tight knit, Hispanic, family, close family unit, lived in the same house at my aunts, my grandparents on, my father's side. That's one thing my mother did, kept a close relationship with them. They weren't in the organization. My maternal grandparents were, but my grandmother was sick, and she had cancer. And I remember she passed away when I was like 9. And I remember that. I remember going through that, and, the way they explain prayer and how, Jehovah would, come through for his faithful ones. And I remember, I was like, if I get this Timothy thing down and pray really hard, I could save my grandmother from this cancer. And I remember praying really, really, really hard. And obviously, unfortunately, she passed away. And that, I remember, was really, really hard. And that was, it's only a couple of years after my father had passed away. So that was a really hard blow. And
when you say this Timothy thing, you're kind of talking about how, wasn't like Timothy raised from infancy, and so they were always like promoting raising your kids to be a little Timothy. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, that was what she used to call me. That's why I always say that. And I did a lot of stuff for her, too. We had a really special relationship, and so anything I could make her happy with, I would do it. I was such a grandma's boy. But
you can tell you kind of light up just talking about her. So that's a beautiful thing. So when faced with that, it's interesting that you brought up that you prayed for her to be, cured of the cancer or whatever, and it didn't happen. How did that impact you?
I was just always, I don't know, I just always had this kind of like an older perspective on things. And I was like, we have to do a lot. I remember having this, like, maybe not saying it because my mother, you couldn't challenge any of that stuff. But it was, it challenged a lot, like the amount of work you put in. I didn't see it as like making sense. And they're all during these years. And it's something that there's a common denominator here. You go through phases of, okay, it may not all be true, but it's still good. And you play these games. So I used to say to myself, if there wasn't so many meetings, like this would be like a little bit better, or like without going out on service and you just went to the meetings. We were really, I was alluding to, I really wanted to be a Catholic and go to the church once a week. That would have been really awesome instead of what ended up happening.
Yeah. Like you're investing so much into this thing. It's your entire life. And what is it really bringing you? Especially as a kid, who's seeing people get sick, like your grandmother, and you're taught the magic of prayer, almost, that you pray about these things, and Jehovah will make things better for you, or whatever the case is. He'll make a way out, or whatever. And you see that there are just cruel realities to life sometimes, and it's not quite as magic as what you thought as a kid or what you were told.
Definitely.
Yeah. So how did things change after that?
So here comes the big change. Is basically the family that my father was studying the Bible with, stayed close with the family, and they found this. We know this young elder from some other congregation. He's got 2 little girls. He's divorced, and they introduced this guy to my mother, and they started, obviously, their courting thing, which, if you could even call courting within that realm, so they get married like a couple months later. So
how old were you at this time?
I was like 9. I remember it being like right after my grandmother passed away. Like, I remember within the same couple months.
Wow.
So then you start living with this man when you're used to, you have we lived in a multi-family house with my grandfather, my other aunts. So now this guy shows up into the picture, and things changed to that. He came from a family that I believe, a big family, and they were multi-generations in, like that's all he knew. So he came in as an authority figure. And then not only that, that system propagates I guess that's another Jehovah's Witness term. The man is the leader of the family. So then you have my mom, who was college educated because she came here young and they went to college. That's where my parents met. And she worked and everything, to having to hand the reins over kind of to this man now. And that's something that I don't even think they're ready for, because they never got to live together to, let's give this a dry run, like, how normal society or most of society works now. So I remember it being really, really dicey, in the sense that they used to fight a lot. Obviously, 2 people, now that I'm an adult, you see, these 2 people just trying to form their lives and live together is not easy. And then you add kids into a scenario. It's not, it came with its growing pains, I guess.
So he had 2 girls, 2 daughters. Were they kind of the same age as you all at the time, or older, younger?
No, they were younger. They lived with their mother most of the time, and there was I'm in touch with my sisters now. They're stepsisters in terms of the story, but they're my sisters. they live with their mother, and pretty early on, my mother drove a wedge between him and his daughters. So his time with them became less and less, and they didn't live with us. So it became like he used to see them like once a month. Like, that was just, looking back now, that had to have been really hard for him. And then for the girls, for my sisters, like that's horrible.
Yeah. How about you? You and your brother, were you kind of like excited to get, I don't know, your kids get excited sometimes, like, oh, more kids, or were you looking forward to that at all, and it just didn't come to pass?
I was excited early on, but it just also too, in the divorce scenario, like there was a lot of drama with that, with his ex-wife, I remember. But it also, I was a kid, I don't really know the details, but there was a couple scenarios where it was just, I remember like a lot of arguing, a lot of yelling.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that you also kind of brought up an interesting point when you said that you were just talking about, witness courting. And, I don't know how long did your mom and him date? Was it very long?
Months. I remember it was months. And obviously when you have to think about things, when you have kids, like you just can't jump into, I just married this man, now he's going to come live with us. Like, not like, he's maybe like try to have the dude stay over 3 days a week, something like that. No. I remember my grandmother passing. I remember my grandmother not liking the guy, but, whatever. She had the all-seeing eye when it came to these things. Like those people that had that discerning eye, like, I don't know, something about that guy I don't like. And that was always her thing. So she passed away. They get married. And then him having to take the spiritual reins of the family. And I remember once he got into the picture, it was full hardcore, like hardcore, because he was an elder. So he was we were in the Spanish congregation. He then learned Spanish to come to the Spanish congregation, was quickly made an elder. And we were like, at that time, and then we had to split congregations because of numbers. Like in the Northeast, like the halls are like packed, and they have to at that time, split congregations, make new congregations. It was just a lot going on. And we went to a new congregation, which we were one of the starting families, I guess. The pilgrims, so to speak. And I remember that going into like elementary, it was elementary, middle school age.
So how did it feel? Or let's just talk about, how did the tone of life change? So you said that, so I know you were super close to your grandmother, and you all had this life pre her new husband, when your mom's new husband. So once your mom remarried, just how did it feel for you? Because it sounds like he was very authoritarian. What was kind of the atmosphere of the home? How did you feel just being at home and even going to the meetings with them once things changed?
A lot of tension. I don't think I ever got used to having a step parent, which is very hard when you remember your parent. Like, I may not have many memories of my father, but like I remember my father. So then having to switch gears there was hard. And then you add the religion, and he immediately tried to throw down some structure of you guys having to make the truth your own. And that comes with work if you're enforcing that as a parent. So you have to, make a way for that information to penetrate these kids, I guess, penetrate their minds and hearts. So it was a lot of that. And I remember having to come to the realization that I have to play ball with this organization, because my mother was also the enforcer of. So in the Hispanic culture, there's corporal punishment. So when you add that and the beliefs of the organization that tell you that whoever you hate your kid if you spare the rod or something like that.
Spare the rod, spoil the child.
Yeah. So we got hit like a lot. So with a lot of things during that time period, there was the discipline and the parenting side, and the religion and the indoctrination became all one, to the point where they were enforcing us not like when a kid acts up in family study, so they would use discipline and hitting us to get us to comply. And I remember having to play ball with them, and that's where it was just miserable. There was this tension, always tension in the house, and they were very authoritative, almost to the point of like living in a police state, where every single thing was pulled apart. If you liked a song, you had to they looked up the lyrics online, that kind of stuff. And if you as a kid, you want to do stuff, you want to experience life. And it got to the point where you just get so tired of getting told, no, you can't do that. And to spare yourself the article they were going to print out for you from the Watchtower, like the CD-ROM, everything was like a conversation. I'm not even asking. Like, so me and my brother would just be like on our own, like, I'm not asking to do that because I don't want to hear it. I don't want a giant article to get printed out and me to have to read this on top of everything else that I have to do. So I kept on with the whole Timothy Act during that time period, I remember.
Yeah, that's tough. I think there was a lot of corporal punishment inside the organization. It used to, even as a child, I remember sitting in a Kingdom Hall and, a kid is expected to sit during a meeting for 2 hours listening to boring, it's just a person up there speaking oftentimes in a monotone way. Not everyone is a great speaker. And, you have children sitting there expected to sit for 2 straight hours and not to wiggle or be children. And, how many times did you see a kid be snatched up by a parent and drug out the back, and you hear the kid screaming before the kid's already screaming because he or she knows what's coming. And people would kind of almost giggle about it like it was cute. And it wasn't cute. It was abusive. It was, you can't sit here. We expect you to behave like a little adult for 2 hours, a little Timothy. And if you can't, then we're going to take you back here and beat the little Timothy into you. It doesn't work either, does it?
No, it doesn't work. And I remember sitting through those meetings, just, imagining running off with my imagination. And I remember once I got into my teenage years, I used to just sit there thinking like I am just like screaming inside my brain, like, like this is horrible. It's bad. I don't know how, and then you like looking at the clock and you're like, oh, 5 minutes have gone by. I could have sworn an hour had gone by. It's boring. It's bad.
Not to make the comparison out that, that going to the meetings is like being in a concentration camp. But Viktor Frankl, his famous quote in Man's Search for Meaning is something to the effect of, everything can be taken from a man, but this last of human rights or choices, and that's the ability to choose one's attitude in a situation or something like that. And, when you're sitting there at the meetings, it's really tough for a kid. Everything has been taken from you. You will sit here. You will dress this way. You will count how many times Jehovah is said during a talk. Your entire all this time is being dictated to you exactly what you're going to do, how you're going to behave, how you're going to think, but they can't control your mind completely. And, if you're a kid, it's truly, some kids, because of the pressure, they succumb. Other kids, because of the pressure, they escape in their own mind. Their imagination runs wild and they daydream or whatever the case may be. But people were just kind of escaping in their own ways a lot of times as young people, trying to find ways to either be interested and make it fit and go all in, or just realize, no, this isn't for me, and I'm going to sit here and kind of daydream. And, I think a lot of reasons there's no windows in Kingdom Halls is because if there were, people would be looking out the windows, daydreaming about being outside all the time.
It really, that's definitely what would happen, because it's, even if you're with it, even if you're, with that, I can't imagine as an adult sitting there and them telling me, oh, you got to get up on Saturday mornings and knock on people's doors. I'm like, what? No, I'm not doing that.
I can tell you, in the last Kingdom Hall I went to, they had windows. They would try to pull the blinds sometimes, but they had windows, and I always wanted to sit by the window. And one of the reasons was, I don't know, just during the meeting, even though I was always pretty all in, I just liked to be able to look outside and see that, like, life was out there. Life was going on. There were birds flying by or squirrels or whatever. It just, I don't know. I think I just at that point needed to detach and see that there was something else out there, because it's so boring inside, like you said. So, you now live in what you termed a police state. So how did that affect you? You kind of mentioned how it led you to say, okay, well, if everything I'm going to do is be policed, then I'm just going to start doing what I do without asking. So what did that look like for you?
I remember my middle school years were really hard, in the sense that when you live in a small town, you're always the kid with the weird religion. I was always really good at school because I didn't want to have to deal with my mom any more than I had to. Because I didn't want to have to deal with like a punishment. I didn't want to let's just avoid that. I'll do really good in school, and hopefully, they won't, embarrass me, So, which I'll go into later. They always did. So basically, really tough time, getting picked on, not saying anything because, it just wasn't. Anytime you would tell them something or tell my mother something and she would have to get involved, it would be this very embarrassing Jehovah's Witness thing will get wrapped into it. And I just avoided it. I was like, I'll handle it on my own. Eventually stood up to the bully, great lesson in life. But I remember being very lonely because it was a school where it had a lot of social stuff, dances, and never being able to go. And to the point where, like, later on in life, it takes your sense of community away. Because, like, hey, you see somebody you went to school with, and you tell them, like, hey, I went to school. Who are you? Or and that, to the point where it was like that amount of invisibility. So I remember having a really tough time in middle school. And then once high school came around, they really got gung-ho about trying to get us to go to a vocational school. So
was that was the vocational school during high school? So basically you could go and learn some sort of trade instead of having to go to any kind of college?
Yeah. So basically they found out that there was this whole line of schools so I was slated to go to the high school in my town, which in retrospect, I should have maybe put up more of a fight to go to that school. So we started touring vocational schools when I came around that age of like 13, 14 to go into high school. And they still wanted me to do something after high school, like something, quick, so I could focus on, dedicating my best years to Jehovah, which is how they put it. So that's when they started looking into that. So a couple towns away, they found this really small vocational school that they liked, I liked, and started going there for high school. And I remember going into it, that's when the whole baptism thing came into play.
So, so I know. So when did I know that you were alluding to the potential of a story around school and your parents' involvement there? Did that happen after you were baptized or before?
Just all growing up. Like I remember after school nights, for example, and where your parent goes in, talks to the teacher, your teacher tells him how, he's doing good. And it would always be, Mario's a great student, Mario's doing great, A's. And I would cringe when the teacher would stop talking because here it comes. Please don't do it. Please don't. Well, Mario's one of Jehovah's Witnesses, and we pride ourselves in being very studious. And I used to want the ground to swallow me because I thought, okay, if you're good, maybe they'll like chill out with the Jehovah stuff, like around other people. But no, went full bore. Like I was just, I would be so embarrassed about that. And it was just a lot of disappointment. I remember just a lot of being disappointed by them and the way that they handled things.
Yeah, kind of sad for a child to be disappointed in his parents. But in those instances, they were attributing your skills to Jehovah's Witnesses. Like you were the one in there doing the work. It was little Mario in there hustling in school, making good grades, and Mario trying to probably get some acknowledgement that was positive for his own skills and abilities. And yet, even then, it was like, well, yeah, he's good at this because he's one of Jehovah's Witnesses. As if all witnesses were good at school. Like that's not the case. No. So it sucks because you're just trying. Everything revolves around Jehovah's Witnesses. So anything you do well, they attribute to Jehovah's Witnesses. And it's sad because, we all want to be, especially as kids, seen, heard, and validated for who we are. But it just really gets into how with Jehovah's Witnesses, their identity is wrapped up in being Jehovah's Witnesses. They don't see themselves or other people as individuals. It's just your Jehovah's Witnesses. So Everything comes back to that. And I can only imagine how embarrassing that was. And just disappointing, like you said.
It's just, at every, just being, definitely going through that changes how you view them. Like your parents are supposed to be your protectors. You're supposed to respect them. And I remember just like this is so stupid, just for such smart people to be, wrapped up. But, these ideas are, so strong that people get wrapped up.
Absolutely. And I had asked, the reason I asked if that was before or after baptism, was I was kind of wondering, if after baptism things ramped up even more, at the school level. So let's talk just leading up to baptism, or what was the situation there? Were you baptized, or when were you baptized? What was the circumstances around it? Were you pushed into it?
So around that time, it was I was going into high school, and it was always explained to me that it'll be a protection, that Jehovah will protect you. You're going to be like Daniel going into the lion's den. There's girls and marijuana, like how they explain the world. Like everybody's just it's school. It's not going to be like you're walking into like a strip club. Like that's what they were preparing you for. You're going to walk in and there's going to be naked women everywhere and you got to stand firm to Jehovah. No, that's not the way. That's not the way it was. But yeah, that's the way it was explained to me. And then also I remember becoming ambitious within the organization. which is if you're a man, you know, obviously the way that system is set up, you can get privileges. And I immediately, like, I put together early on that if you were a spiritual man, you'd have better, this sounds really messed up what I'm about to say, but I guess we can explain it a little bit. The more spiritual you are as a man, the better quality mates you're going to have. You know, not like, that's the way I always viewed it. So, because it was, you know how it is when you get to the dating ages in the organization. So I became ambitious there, and, you know, I was like, so I have actually a funny story around that time period, a little bit before I got baptized. There was a sister in the same hall that she was like 15. I was like 12. And we had exchanged numbers, and we were talking on the phone, and I was like hiding. I would go into my grandfather's apartment downstairs. I had like 3 conversations with her. Well, being I lived in, I don't know how I got caught, but I believe that they were, you know how the old landline bills used to come with a list of the numbers that you called in a month?
Yep.
They used to look at that long. I'm talking about pages. That bill was pages long. They used to look and check the numbers. So I remember I got caught. I got like a real stern talking to about like, you're too young for this. And I remember her parents were like, you know, seeing it as kind of like, you know, it's very innocent right now, but this could be a way of like kind of keeping them like in this, you know, which, thinking about it, that's pretty sinister. But yeah, it was a little bit of a scenario, like, well, that would later, you know, me, phones, and girls, I'd get in trouble for.
You know, I like what you said a minute ago. I think you really nailed something, and that was that because Jehovah's Witnesses view spiritual qualifications as the qualifications du jour of a mate, those are the qualifications you're supposed to look for.
Yes.
You think, hey, if I do all these things and if I move up the ladder, then I have more choices when it comes to a mate, because people will be attracted to me simply because I comment at the meetings and I'm a pioneer and a young ministerial servant, or whatever the case may be. You know, those are the qualities that you're supposed to look for in a mate. So it really sets up this weird dynamic by which brothers then have expectations that sisters are going to look up to them or like them or whatever, simply because they're a good, you know, spiritual head or whatever in the congregations, because they're doing the right things. But what it sets up is a dynamic by which young men are being told not to be good people, not to be empathetic or learn how to deal with the opposite sex or learn how to even be secure in themselves. They're just taught how to be better cult members and keep up appearances, because that's all that matters. And that's all we were told that mattered, was just look the part, do the things you got to do, and all the rest will come. And so there's no real emotional attachment there. And it creates a lot of really messed up marriages and very immature young men who don't know who they are and don't know how to deal with people at all. They just know how to be little robots that follow the steps to climb the ladder that is supposed to make everything better.
Definitely. Yeah. And then that's when I get baptized around leading it. I remember it was the summer leading up to high school. Now, around that time period, there was something else going on. My grandfather, like I mentioned before, was in it, my mother's father, and he lived in the same house as us. Now, he had been a widower because my grandmother had passed away for, you know, some years at that point. And he was a ministerial servant, so I used to hang out with him a lot. Like, we were really close. I used to go downstairs, hang out in his apartment all the time. We had like a very close relationship. And at that time, he was starting to see a woman at work, which is like super scandalous in Jehovah's Witness culture, I guess. So that obviously was a big no-no. So he wanted to go and be with this woman. So he moved out. And that happened like right as I'm going into high school. And it was really, really, really hard for me. Like, not seeing my grandfather every day. We used to sneak and watch boxing because like they lived the whole life before getting into this, So he used to tell me about when he was young, and we just connected. And he was gone now. And I remember I was like really depressed about it. And then I remember getting to school early. Well, going back to the helicopter parenting, she used to pay. She didn't want us to take the bus. Like, anything to cut down on like contact with other people was like that was paramount. So she used to pay for us to get a ride to school every day. So they used to drop us off early, like at 7, and school used to start at 7:55. So I had like 55 minutes to myself before school. So I remember sitting on the steps of this new school. I knew no one. And I just said to myself, this isn't going to be like middle school. I'm not playing by their rules. Like, when I'm here, I'm at school. When I'm there, when I'm home, I'll play by their rules. All that helicopter parenting did to my brother and I was made us better at sneaking around, made us better at lying, made us into spies, basically. Cutting out, thick books, the pages out of thick books to hide stuff in, just made us these incredible special agents. Really insane technical stuff that I think back to now, and I'm like, how? That's not the way a teenager should live. That's not the way. So you're tense. So it became at every turn you could be found out, because that's also within witness culture that you can't trust people your age. Because what if I trust you and we go smoke cigarettes and drink a 40 out in this backyard, and then you feel bad about it, and then you tell on not only yourself but me too. So you'd always have to be. I remember always having to hide, and that high school was one that, since it was a vocational school, you could be from a couple different towns. So it wasn't only, you didn't only have to watch out for, like, if you had one witness from your hall in your school, you had to watch out for people from different congregations. So I remember early on, my teenage years just full of paranoia, trying to remember people's faces. Whenever my stepfather would have to give a talk somewhere else, having to, remember, try to figure out who the kids my age were in the hall, try to remember their faces, get names. It was just this incredibly rigorous thing that my brother and I had to go through. It's just very, very hard.
Yeah, that's really tough. You're trying to just, again, this comes down to Jehovah's Witnesses vernacular. They would say you're leading a double life, but again, they're the double life. You were just trying to be authentically you. That's your actual life. Being a Jehovah's Witness was your double life. And you're just trying to be you and trying to figure out some way to do that. And because you live in such a police state, you have to resort to all these ridiculous things. Some of it may have actually been fun. Like, I can just see you like hollowing out books and things like that. But it's a lot of pressure. And I think it really kind of like, I think from a young age sets us up sometimes to be people who are really desensitized to stress because we grow up in such high levels of stress that it doesn't really affect us anymore later, or it still affects us, but we don't realize it because we've just our level of normal for stress is like way up here because we have our whole lives had to hide certain parts of us, tried to find ways around things just to get by and survive. So that because on the other side were these horrible punishments like shunning and things like that, and so it just caused so much drama that a lot of us, I think, almost kind of get addicted to the stress, which can present problems later in life. But it comes from trying to be, like you said, like a special agent, like trying to find some little ways to carve out a niche for yourself while at the same time having to play these games at home and at the Kingdom Hall. It's exhausting.
It definitely is. No, I believe that, and what I've read and everything in life, putting that kind of stress and pressure on a forming mind can lead to some crazy stuff. And definitely see the case in other stories I've heard and my own story.
So how did things continue to build from there? As so now you've got 55 minutes in front of school every day. Like that's a long time for a mind that wants to do some things. How did it work? How did you start living this more authentic life? What did it look like? How did you start finding little things you wanted to just try or experiment with as a teenager?
I remember getting into smoking cigarettes very early on in my high school career. So basically the kids and teachers used to go have like this one smoking area, and there was this big park next to the school. So, I made friends at that point, and we used to go into the park next to school, smoke cigarettes, drink, smoke a little weed, that kind of stuff before school. So I got kind of used to doing that for years, just covering my tracks constantly, and got pretty proficient at it, I would say. All along, giving my talks, giving my number 4s, my number 2s. I also figured out my stepfather is into construction, so he would do regional building committee. So I figured out if I do regional building committee, I don't have to sit through this boring ass meeting. I could just work with my hands all day and build kingdom halls. And, it looks good. It looks really good. That's a crappy way to live. But that's the way I saw it at the time. So we start work. I remember being too young to even have the working papers and having to meet with the brother in charge and, to see, he's like, you look wise beyond your years. Just please don't get hurt. Had to sign this thing, and they let me work like starting like at 14. So I used to love when projects came up because, hey, look, we got to go for the weekend, and, a couple weekends, sometimes after work or after school. You'd go over there and work, and that kind of stuff was cool. I like that stuff. But it was always outsmarting like my mom and my stepfather. That's the way life was. And it became hard. It obviously becomes the weight of it becomes too big to bear. And that's also part of the story later on.
All right. So you had mentioned that this was kind of around the time leading up toward, thinking about baptism. So when did you actually get baptized?
So I got baptized before high school, the summer leading up to high school. So then my high school started, I was already baptized, but there, through the other things going on in life, that's when I made that choice. I couldn't do another 4 years of being the invisible kid with the weird religion. Like, I saw it as a blank slate because it wasn't even people from our town. Like, there was other witness kids from our hall in that school. But they looked like they were on some double life stuff anyway. So it was kind of like, look, man, I'll leave you alone, and it's a paranoia. Like, those guys eventually thought that I was snitching on them. But, I'd like to say I did not. It was just my stepfather that had it out for you guys. And pretty much, here's the crazy part about it is how the youth is viewed. So you could be this charismatic, young, funny kid just because that's the way you are. And if an elder or the wrong person sees that, that kid's trouble because he makes the other ones laugh. Look, they're not going to pay attention to us. They're going to pay attention to that kid. And they see those kind of kids as a threat. And think about it. You're an adult and you're talking this way about someone else's kid and a teenager. That's, oh, this kid's going to be a problem. No, they're just being a kid, you know?
Yeah, there's no allowance inside the organization for humans to just be humans, or kids to be kids, or, you know, teenagers to be teenagers. It's all about judging and trying to figure out, is this person good association or are they bad association? You know, is this person somebody that we can use in the congregation to do things, or is this somebody that, yeah, we maybe need to keep an eye on? They're going to end up in a bunch of judicial committees later. You know, it's a lot of paranoia about kids, and it's kind of weird to be judging teenagers like they do as adults.
Yeah, they're still forming. What you got to let them kind of form out into who they are. Like, you know, give them the tools, shower it the way I see it, like a plant. You can't, you know, let the plant soak in negativity and, you know, nasty, dirty water. They love to say, oh, look at this person living outside of the organization. You know, they don't see what they did to that person leading up to that. And, you know, they don't look at that at all.
No, they think they have refreshing waters of life, you know, that would grow any plant magically. They got Miracle Grow in there. They don't. They kill plants constantly. Look at the attrition rate and how many young people end up leaving. Just how many people end up leaving. They really do a number on people, and it's really sad. And then they blame the people that they end up hurting for being hurt. So for yourself, how did this continue to grow for you as you got older?
So basically, the high school years, I started gaining more, you know, privileges, quote unquote, in the congregation, which is just work for free. So I was doing a lot of talks. I was like their filling guy, regional building committee, passing mics, literature department. So I remember my parents said, like, oh, instead of getting me a cell phone, they said, we can monitor this better if we get him a landline. So let's get him a landline to his room because he's got his own stuff going on. My stepfather was really busy as an elder. So the guy had an office, like a Jehovah's Witness command. We also had the book study in our basement, and they had it set up like a Kingdom Hall in that room. It just like a Jehovah's Witness command center downstairs with the CD-ROMs going at all times, a library. So as soon as I get this landline, I start giving my number out to girls in school. And the guy messed up and crossed the line. So when you pick up the regular phone line in the house, my line, you'd hear the conversation on my line.
Oh no!
So immediately get caught like talking to girls. I get my landline taken away. It wasn't that big of a deal, you know. Like privately, I don't even know if we even told the elders. It was just like two conversations. It was just so innocent, but whatever. So I got in trouble for that around like 15 years old. And I had also I upped my secret agent double life game to the point where I was jumping out the window like Friday nights after our meetings and taking my mom's car and like joyriding with like friends. And I had done it for like a while, and I eventually would get caught when I was like 16. So things kind of started cracking at the seams there.
Yeah, you're starting to do bigger jobs now.
Yeah, I was a little you're not a criminal, but you felt like a little criminal doing that stuff. So basically I had got pulled over. The cops took me in, and then they were calling the house, and my brother was the only one awake, and he thought it was a joke. So they finally get my going back to clear head in a stressful situation. The police officer was so incredibly mad that I had no reaction. The guy was like really like, usually people in that scenario, if you don't have a lot of experience with the police, like you're nervous, like dealing with something like that. I was just what you said, you're used to being in these stressful scenarios all the time. So I remember the police officer was so mad, like he was like to the other cops when I was sitting there, he's like, look at him, he's got even no expression on his face, he's got no remorse, blah, blah, blah. So they get in touch with my parents. They come to I hate even saying parents. My stepfather and my mother came to the police station. They came. As soon as I had worn a Metallica T-shirt, because I was like really into metal, had like contraband music collection. This girl had given me it from school, and I was wearing this Metallica T-shirt. So when she saw me and she saw the shirt, she grabbed that shirt and started to like close fist punching, like just wailing on me in the police station. Granted, I was, kind of maybe deserved it for scaring the crap out of them. But yeah, I remember she ripped it. She was like, I want you to take that shirt off right now. And then my stepfather was like, what is he going to go home with? Like, it was just, thinking back, it was like a little comical. Like, what am I going to do? Walk out of here without a shirt? She's like, take it off right now. So then we get home, and the pressure had built up so much that I was cursing at them. And I had never cursed at my mom. I had never cursed at my stepfather. And it just all came out. Like, all that frustration came out that night. Then they're like, like, where is this coming from? Like, we have this Timothy-like kid. What is this? So then they go in my room, find the contraband music, break all my CDs. So it becomes even more like a police state. So then they were saying, oh, that happened in the summer. So then summer vacation, they made me preach that summer hardcore with like this other older elder. Just rough. Like, if it was bad before, it got even worse. So I had mentioned that we didn't really get to hang out with a lot of kids our age. We did get to hang out like these 20-somethings in the congregation that were doing well. And like, though they really took us under their wing and they were nice to us, and I lived for hanging out with them. But then I started getting in trouble, and then they started having, to like not hang out. And that was tough. And then I knew somehow that I wasn't going to be in the organization, that my future was like, I wasn't going to be able to keep hiding this. And that night was a big turning point. But I was able to get them off my back enough to, so I could get my operations back up and running again. And that's how it was progressing. But I started to then, like, and I remember an assembly came around, and I would always be watching a fire alarm. What I don't know what they call it in English. Like the guys that with the tag that watch the fire alarms in all the assembly halls.
Like the attendant?
Like a doorman. Yeah, I used to be attendant in like every assembly. And I got to the point where I was like, I don't want to do this. No. So I told my stepfather, I'm not attending in this assembly. So I remember, like, a lot of it was like about appearances with my mom. And she was like, okay, if you don't want to work, then you're not going to walk around during lunch. So I was like, okay. Because I'm more stubborn, that the only thing that thing did for me was I don't care what you do to me. I'm not going to play. Like, I will resist at any way I can. I'll resist. So I remember like just that turning point of like, no, this is ridiculous. And not wanting to play ball.
And doesn't that really show that it's about control? I mean, if it all boils down to you as a kid for how you have to resist, then it really just kind of goes to show that, I mean, what are you resisting? You're not resisting their love because there's some loving people. You're resisting their control. It's all about control and trying to fit you into a mold, even if you don't fit there. Like, it's a shame because they could have had a good relationship with you and you all could have had this like loving family if everyone wasn't trying to force everyone else into a little box.
Exactly.
You know, it's sad. It's a waste. It's a waste of time and a waste of energy and a waste of family to live in that way. And it's just a shame because there's so much more to life than that.
It was, and then another big part in those high school years. So my brother then we're close in age, so he came to join me at that same school. So he was a freshman, I was a junior, and I had basically brought him into there was a moment where when I was a freshman, he caught me smoking cigarettes. And I was like, I'm done, because if this kid tells, I'm done. And right then and there, my brother was like, show me, like, I want to smoke too. And I was like, okay. So I guess I felt, thinking back now, that's terrible. But I had, there was just this moment where I knew that, my brother was going to have my back. And that was, going back, if I hadn't had my brother, like, the story could have been very different. So when he joined us at school, so we'd go into the woods before school and like we'd smoke cigarettes, like, drink, whatever before school. So there was someone's niece from like another congregation that was studying with that other Cuban family that we were close with and whose kid was like, we were really good friends with. So one weekend, the kid comes to our house. We're spending a weekend together. Like, we're staying up late, drinking, like doing whatever. And that was like our little escapes, like listening to metal, like in my room. So I remember that Sunday when the parents came to pick him up, they said like, oh, so, we gotta talk to you guys. So basically that girl told the lady she was studying with, my friend's mom, that my brother had been smoking. She saw my brother smoking cigarettes in the woods next to the school. So then they go. So I'm like, this is all going to come crashing down. So I was just ready for the fall. So they called my brother outside in front of our house. And me and my friend are like peeking out the window like this, like out of a corner of a window. And we're like, oh my God, what's going to happen? Because we were all in this double life game. So all I see is my mother make a fist and punch my brother directly in the face, like right in the nose. And my brother just starts bleeding out of his nose. I'm like, oh my God, this is bad. She must have found out something bad. So then my brother comes inside crying. They stay talking outside. I'm like, what did you tell them? We need to get damage control. Like, what happened? What happened? Like, he's crying, and like, it's devastating to someone living in those scenarios because he wasn't baptized or anything, but the little freedom you had could be all taken away from you. So the stakes were high in this game we were playing as kids, where you don't have full grasp of the situation. So Pete tells me like, hey, they caught me smoking. I didn't say anything about you. And, that was another like solidifying factor. You have to also account for if we both get caught, like he can't help me with stuff. Like we're both going to be locked down. So he was probably thinking, I don't know what he was thinking exactly, but he was probably like, at least I could still, Mario could do stuff for me, So there
I
was
really
that.
I appreciate the terms that you're using, like being locked down and stuff. I mean, like it sounds like prison. It really does, like you've got to keep each other. It's cool of him not to turn you in, because that allowed the game to continue. Because if he had turned you in, what happens? Like you said, you both end up on lockdown. It's just, I think that your description of it as a police state is pretty appropriate for the levels of control, the fear, always trying to get away with something, even though it wasn't anything like huge in life. It's just kids being kids, teenagers being teenagers, but the stakes are so high as Jehovah's Witnesses growing up. And I think that's what really sets it apart, is the stakes are just, there's so much pressure there to conform, that it really puts kids in bad situations, like this. It's just a shame. So I'm sure you were quite proud of your brother for not narking on you.
Yeah, I mean, it was like, it was just very scary, like just scared. I remember being so scared all the time. And then I remember that time period, something big happened. Basically, one night, that same kid's parents took us to like a rec center, and we came back home. And then my mom and stepfather sat me down, and it's like, you're doing well within the truth. You made the truth your own, which I was like, okay, you'll use little conversations like that to gauge like what they really think about you. But even then, there would never be like a full trust of you. Like, oh, they explained that spring analogy, and you can't let the spring out. But there would never be any, like, I'm doing good, I'm doing everything I'm supposed to, and I still have like zero freedom to like go out on my own, do whatever. So that was like a lie, and it just never came. So they sat me down. They told me, we really need your help with your brother with the smoking thing. Just help him out, guide him, use whatever has helped you. So then I decided this may be the only chance I get to tell my mother and stepfather how I really feel about this. And it was a giant, huge leap of faith. So I proceed to tell them, I'm not happy living like this life of a Jehovah's. I just want to be normal. Like I don't even want to do bad things. I just want to be normal. This is too much. I'm depressed. I don't want to live like this. Like, I don't want to live. If this is what life is, like, this life sucks. And this is me telling them this at 15 years old. I'm throwing everything that we worked for into the fire, because at that point they could have been like paranoid about me and said, we're locking you down. And I took this giant risk and told them. And their answers to me about me being depressed was, you need to pray more to Jehovah. And, there had been plenty of other times, but this was just a moment where I knew my mother's lost. This is over. There's no negotiating with these people. There's no them respecting, like maybe coming to a point where I work and have a job or go to some sort of schooling, but not go to the meetings and live here. I knew that was impossible. So that night I was like pretty upset. So my mom used to take these pills, like for her headaches, quote unquote, which we've talked about this within the witness community. There's a lot of prescription pill abuse, but back to the story. So that night I grabbed like 10 of those pills, and I was like, I don't want to live. I do not want to live like this anymore. If this is life, I want to die. So I grabbed 10. Obviously, I don't know that could have killed me or not. Took them. Everybody went to bed. I put a CD on. I had like my little CD player. I was like, listen to an album or something, and took the pills. In the middle of the night, I just wake up like really like heavy, like limbs, stumble over to the bathroom, throw up. And I think that's maybe the reason why I'm here. But it was a huge moment where I confided in them. And here we go yet again, where I wanted them to be human beings and see me and not see this as an opportunity to sling some indoctrination or everything. What bothers me a lot about it is they take parenting out of the equation and let the organization parent for them. And that's not the way it should be. I mean, if you want to choose a religion and be a parent, your parenting is separate from your belief, I think. I don't have any kids, but that's what I think after everything I've gone through.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because I remember I was watching, and it might have been Leah Remini's show on Scientology, or it could have been a podcast I was listening to about Scientology. I can't remember. But they were talking about, I think in the Sea Org, where I just remember being appalled because they were talking about basically, it sounds like the adults just kind of dedicate themselves to the Sea Org, and the kids are just kind of taken away from them. Like, they don't really believe in like parent-child attachment at all. And I was like, wow, that's, I guess at least Jehovah's Witnesses didn't have that. And then, I started thinking about it, and it was like, wait a minute, Jehovah's Witnesses kind of did, because it's like what you just said. They allow the organization to do the parenting for them. They're not necessarily being the parent. They're just parroting whatever the organization tells them. They're just saying whatever the organization says to say to children or teenagers or whatever who act a certain way. They just repeat the company line. That's all it is. It's like a lot of times, so many times your parents aren't even really like your parents. They're just clones of the other witnesses who are coming into this, maybe with a little of their own personality, but with the doctrine and with the lines that they've read in the latest Watchtower about parenting and how to treat children, and they just regurgitate it automatically. There's no real emotional connection. They're just upholding the rules. It's all about crime and punishment, which I think, again, is why it's like a police state, because it's not about seeing the child, seeing that you're hurting. Here's young Mario coming to them saying, hey, look, I'm going to be vulnerable with you and I'm going to be open. And then you get nothing out of it, but you should pray more. Like, that's so dumb. and even as a kid, you could see how dumb that was. You needed help. You needed to be seen. You needed real parenting in the moment, and you got nothing. And it's really sad because they just don't have anything to offer. They're like, we became hollow shells, just filled at most with JW indoctrination to regurgitate to people. That was it. It's just really sad because you were a hurting kid and you should have been helped and seen and heard and given a hug or whatever. And instead, you were just given form answers, like getting a form email.
Yeah.
From the company, it doesn't do any good.
Keep working and doing your privileged stuff. Keep at it, and eventually it'll click. And that's a lot of what they believe to be true.
And you just see how far it ends up pushing people. Here you are, a 15-year-old kid taking pills because you don't want to live that way, and it looks bleak at that time. I really feel for. A lot of times, because I'm active in the ex-witness community, I see people on forums and Reddit or whatever, and you see these young kids coming on that are like, I don't want to do this. And, there's really there's not a lot of great answers. It's buckle down and do it until you can get out of it. Where are you going to go? You're stuck with parents who are rigid and they're not going to allow you to do anything else. They're not going to understand in most cases. And it's really sad because your life is so binary. You do this or what? Actually, it's not even binary. it's singularity. Maybe that's the word. I don't know. What's the word for unitary? You have one way you can go, and that's it.
That's it.
That's it. And it's really sad for so many kids to be pushing that. So I'm sorry that happened to you. You can see how far they push people over and over again. And the sad thing is, I'm happy that you're still here. The sad thing is that there are a lot of people who aren't still here, and it's because they were pushed into such a hopeless and desperate state.
Exactly. We know of people, that
I do.
Sometimes the story doesn't turn out, where there's healing and there's positivity. Sometimes there's stories where people don't make it, and it's sad. It's really sad.
It really is. I could have been one of those people too. I had my rock bottom moments too. So it's just really sad. I'm thankful to still be here, but I understand. And I'm gonna tell people, anyone who's out there, it gets better. You can get away from it eventually, and start to have your own life. Life does get better. Like a slogan you hear sometimes in the gay community, where they've had campaigns and such to help, young gay kids understand that life can get better. And it really is. Eventually you can start to have your own life and find something beautiful in it. But unfortunately, there's a lot of desperate times at times being raised in these really controlling environments where you're not allowed to be yourself.
Definitely.
So for you, how did things go after this big moment for you?
So basically a lot of the same. There had been I know I mentioned before, we were very close with, my mother's side of the family, and he slowly but surely had driven a wedge between my mother and her sisters because they weren't obviously not in the organization. So, there was like isolation of like my family at that time. I kept a journal around that time, and, just one of the lines that I see here: I can't live like this anymore. I need to get away. Nothing is ever my way or on my side. And it's just, it was just a horrible, horrible, very dark time where you're trying to figure out your life and you're not equipped because they didn't teach you anything about the real world. You live this very sheltered life, to where now you're going to be turning 18 and you're making decisions about your life and like what you're going to do after. Can I keep living here, keep doing this? So like, at least they can help me get some schooling in so I could figure out my life. There was plotting with other kids that weren't happy, and like trying to come up with plans, like maybe together, if we get money together, we could get an apartment when we're 18. And that's the kind of conversations you're having at 15, 16 years old. This is supposed to be the best times of your life. You're supposed to have, you're supposed to be going to prom and, going out with your friends and getting a car and having all these cool moments. And we're talking about these very heavy things and having to hide and being stressed out. And I remember saying to myself, well, I don't have any money, any training. When I turn 18, I'm just going to join the military. And I ended up not joining the military, but you're having to make these incredibly big decisions when you're not equipped. And that's another huge thing in, most of our stories.
Yeah, absolutely. You were talking earlier about just being 13, going into high school and scoping out vocational schools, to try to get some sort of education that, will set you up to use your youth for Jehovah or whatever. But it's like kids at 18 don't know what they want to do when they go off to college or the military or whatever. Like, kids often don't know what they want to do at 18 because you're 18 years old. At 13, you're kind of even expected, like, let's pick a high school with a good vocational program that's going to set you up to do whatever it is you're going to do the rest of your life so that you can do Jehovah's Witness stuff the rest of your life and go
Yeah.
out preaching and live that witness life. It's so much on kids to be forced into this. You're supposed to be exploring at this age. You're supposed to be trying to figure out who you are and what you want out of life. And that involves experimentation and being exposed to different things so that you know what it is you want or for yourself or who you are. And all you get is shoved back into that tiny little box constantly. Like, don't peek outside it. Don't think about anything. Don't have dreams. And so you get desperate and look for ways out however you can find it. For you, how did things continue to progress as you started going toward 18? These are big moments. You're going to decide what direction you're going to take your life in. So, how did you continue to live and explore?
So my brother and I kept at our, very high stakes game of double life game. And I reached my senior year. I was a young graduating. I graduated at 17, so I was like 16 at the beginning of the year. So basically every day before school, we'd, go smoke in the park, drink, whatever. And this particular morning, we came in late to our school. So one of the teachers was like, "Hey, what were you guys doing?" So we go to our class, we had smoked weed, so we were stoned in class. And then I remember the teacher coming and calling me out of class, and I was like, "Damn, I think this is it." So go sit down in the office. My brother comes in, and I'm like, I don't know if we were just so good at being in stressful scenarios or we were just really stoned. But maybe 45 minutes, an hour late goes by. My mother walks in and I'm like, it's it, brother. This is it. So, devastated. They told her, we were smoking weed. They gave us a drug test, that same evening, they call the elders, and the elders come. So then the elders sit down with me. Then they sit down with my brother. My brother wasn't baptized. I was baptized. So they were just shocked to see me, the spiritual, elder son type guy that's always filling in to give the talks and doing the literature and the regional building committee. So they start in. They're like, I remember them asking me if I was under the possession of any demons. And I was just thinking to myself, do they know how marijuana works? Or
what? I thought you were gonna say, are you in the possession of any drugs or something?
No, man. No, they asked me if I was straight up possessed. And yeah. What if I would have come out at that moment and been like made like one of those voices like in the movies, like, hey, yeah, this is Satan, like what if I had done that in that very moment? But yeah, that's the kind of ignorant, stupid stuff they came out with. So then interrogated there. So then I made the decision that I said, this is it. I can't go back to, I don't want to do this anymore. So I told them straight out. I was like, I've never wanted to do this. I've, for a number of years just played along. So then there was meetings in the Kingdom Hall, like after one of the meetings. And I remember sitting there for hours and hours and hours and hours, just them reading text to me. And, I was just telling them like, look, the school's telling me like, we have a drug problem. I want to focus on me first, and then I could come back and think about coming back. Let me do that. I don't want to be a Jehovah's Witness. Like, let me focus on what I have to focus on in my life and getting my stuff together. And then I can focus on coming back. And they had worked me for hours reading me text. And I remember in the beginning, I was like, no, I don't want to be a Jehovah's Witness. I don't want to do this anymore. And then I was just like, let me work on this, and then we can talk about this at a later time. Why don't we do that? And there was just, no, you have to either, repent or, and I was like, look, I don't want to be Jehovah's Witness. So then they told me right then and there, we're going to have to disfellowship you. So then I was like, okay. So basically, my mother was devastated. She was crying. And she was like, you should appeal, because you have 7 days to appeal. And I was like, no, I don't want to appeal. So it came the time for the meeting. So usually, I don't know, they used to do it different, where that weekly meeting, I don't know, the school meeting, and they used to give that announcement in between, like when they do the song and the prayer and then the second part starts. They used to say those announcements in there. But I think they got smart and they were like, we can't drop these heavy news on these people in the middle of the meeting, because then no one will pay attention. So the meeting goes all the way through. They sing the song, say the prayer. Right after the prayer, that's when they made the announcement. Like literally, amen. And then we would just like to inform you, Mario, blah, blah, has been disfellowshipped. And I remember we were sitting in the back, and it was like, I knew that there was no other way. That I knew I was going to end up there. But it hurt. Like it sent, when they said it, it was like lightning. The feeling of like an electric pain went down my chest, like anxiety maybe. So I put my stuff away, and I go out to walk out to the car to wait for them to, you do the disfellowshipping person dance. You walk out so no one can see your troll face or whatever. So walking out that first night, someone that was part of our study group we had gone on vacation with them. I remember walking out and have like banging shoulders with that guy because he wouldn't get out of my way. Like I was straight up invisible. And I remember like that was the first taste of disfellowship life. We broke bread together. We were in the same group. They were friends with my mom. Like I said, vacations, laughing. They had seen me grow up. They had been to my graduation party. So I was like, okay, so we just got to get tough, So I walked out to the car, sat in the back seat of the car, and then slowly but surely my brother came, my mother came, and it was just the three of us in the car at the time. Now, my mother and father had met in college, and basically I wasn't a planned pregnancy. So like they were still in the world, so to speak. So they were contemplating getting an abortion, which is the story I've been told with me. So the story goes that she was in the clinic and she walked out, and that's why I'm here. So that night when I was disfellowshipped, she came into the car and she was hysterically crying. And she says to me, I should have gotten the abortion. And that in my life, there's these moments in life that define, and that would go on to define my, relationship with her thereafter. I wanted, after all of the horrible things, out of all those horrible years, growing up, and granted, I'm not going to sit here, they provided for us. We were provided for, I don't want to say that, but they definitely went hardcore indoctrination, tried to indoctrinate us into a cult. And that wasn't okay. That's not okay for anyone.
Can I say that being provided for is a low bar?
Yeah. I mean, there's so much more.
Yeah, there's so much more. I just want to point that out because that's something a lot of people, sometimes even people who grow up with money will say, well, my parents gave me anything I wanted materially. And it's like, well, all right, fine. But like, if they didn't provide for you, they would go to jail. You do
Yeah.
kind of have to feed and water the kids. That's
Yeah.
part of it. But I understand what you're saying. But I just want to point out that's kind of a low bar. Parents are supposed to be there mentally and emotionally. They're supposed to be love. These are the things that really need to be there. And I'm sure that statement she made really hurt.
I mean, it took me all these years because that time period where you're having to learn life as a 16-year-old kid on the fly, when they made no efforts with living, like I said, this very sheltered life. So basically, if I thought the Jehovah's Witness life was bad before, disfellowshipping was a whole other level of. That happened October 29th, 2004. So I was born that day. I feel that that was the beginning of my new life. So I knew it was going to be hard, but I didn't care. Everything leading up to that was pretty hard, and we had made it through. So I was, I'm going to do it. So basically, still having to go to family study, still having to go to the meetings, with everyone making believe you're invisible, is a horrible, horrible feeling. Horrible. I wouldn't wish that upon my worst enemy. So I remember after one meeting them telling me, hey, the elders sat us down and they said that, you need to change your face when you're in the Kingdom Hall because you look like you do not want to be there, and you have to be making efforts to get reinstated. And I told her, you're going to have to get ready for the fact that I don't want to be reinstated. So then I was even asking at that time, like, can I just not go to meetings? Like, I don't want to do this. I don't the cat's out of the bag at that point. I had nothing to lose because I lost everything up to that point. So basically that was the end of October. We're going to November, and it was a couple of weeks of them just pretty much treating me invisible until it was time to do family study. Now, junior, senior year, you're supposed to try to figure out what colleges you're going to. There was none of that, none of that going on. So I had no idea what I was going to do after high school. It was months away. It was very stressful, very stressful. That's where that idea came of joining the military right when I turned 18. But I would graduate as a 17-year-old, so I'd have to wait a whole other couple months because my birthday's in October. So it's living under this high tension to the point where I was just reading books, doing push-ups in my room, hanging out with my dog because they would really go out of their way to let my brother go out with the people in the hall now to make you feel it. So I would just be home all the time. I even asked, can I start hanging out with people from school? Because I literally hang out with no one. You've now let him hang out how we were never allowed to hang out. So,
ooh, I got a question. Were you allowed to hang out with him, with your brother?
Yeah, I was allowed to hang out with my brother.
Okay.
But it was just, I was trying to get them to a point where there would be some kind of mutual respect. That was my ultimate goal. I thought maybe I could go to college, have them help me with college at least, and then get out on my own. I have a job. I'll get a job, whatever. But that was never to come. That November, it was a couple of weeks after. No. It was sometime around the time of Thanksgiving. My grandmother on my father's side had been sick in the hospital with pneumonia. So I had said, hey, can I get a ride and, go see my grandmother? She's home. And my stepfather said they could still be celebrating Thanksgiving over there. And Thanksgiving had clearly been over. Maybe it was December. I don't know. But so he gets it had boiled over to that point, and I was like, no holds barred here. And I was like, why don't you pull your head out of your ass? Thanksgiving's over. I just want to go see my grandmother. What's the big deal here? Like a bull. If I had said the worst possible thing to him. He gets up, gets in my face, starts chest bumping me. We're face to face. And he goes, I'm going to kill you. So, and I was like, you know what? This may be a blessing in disguise. Maybe this guy does kill me. He goes to jail. My brother gets to live a great life, outside of this organization. So I went upstairs to the kitchen upstairs and grabbed the biggest butcher knife and came back downstairs, and I handed it to him. I didn't go to use it on him. I told him, I was like, kill me. Put your money where your mouth is. Kill me right here. Kill me right here, because living like this, I would rather die. So we get into this whole, my brother separates us. And this whole time, my mother the adrenaline's going. My mother's closed fist punching me in the side of my head, my face, yelling at me, like cursing just yelling. Like I'm walking around the house and this woman's on me like white on rice, like hitting me. And the hits are just like, the adrenaline was so much so that I just felt the hits like, doof, 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 like everything. And I remember going up, a friend of mine from the hall who was older had gotten me a cell phone, and I was, communicating with her. And I went upstairs, grabbed that phone, grabbed a hooded sweatshirt, and basically somebody called my grandparents that weren't in the organization on my father's side. And that's when my aunts, my grandparents, they showed up to the house and like, what is this? And basically from that point on, I went to go live with my grandparents on my father's side in another town. It was my senior year. So basically I never went back after that. Like they threw me out. I remember her saying, you're not my son anymore. And I left. I had to leave. They threw me out. And then I was living with my grandparents. We were thrust into the world. They were in their, late 60s, 70s, retirement age, taking on now a teenage kid. And that was, there could be 100 lives. I could live 100 lives, and it would never be, I could never describe the thanks. Like, thank you is just not enough for what they did for me. So I went to go live with them. They told me basically, you have a roof over your head and the food we eat here, everything else you provide for yourself, which really, that's all I needed at that point. And that's where I started my life, just figuring out life as a 17-year-old kid. I could always go to them and ask them for, guidance, and they were always there to help me out. And as the rest of my family that wasn't in the organization. So that happened. Having to take mass transit, walking everywhere, like not having a lot of money, and just making it happen. Like, it was terrifying now thinking back. But at the time, I remember just making that stubborn decision. I said, I don't care what they say. I'm not going back. I don't care if I have to live on the street. Because there was also that scary time. You're a minor. You're living with grandparents. At any time, those people could call the cops, and the cops will have to bring you back. And then what? I would have to kill the guy, or he would kill me? Like, it was scary. It was a scary, scary scenario. And it just goes to show you the situation that the pressure that these high control authoritative groups put on people, where you just don't want to live anymore. And that, working yourself past that point is hard. What else? Time period.
I think that's an important point, because before you can really thrive, you have to survive. And you're just a kid, and you don't have skills. You've not been given skills to live on your own, to develop a life for yourself. You don't know who you are entirely. You're still developing. You're just a kid. And step one is just survival. Okay, now I've got a roof over my head and I've got food. all right, now what else can I do to start to get the things that I need for myself? But you don't even know what you need because you're just a kid, and you've got to, you'll have to figure that out as you go. So it really puts you at such a disadvantage because you just have to work on survival and figuring out, where you're going to go from here, how you're going to get money, what's your path up. It's so unfair to put that on a kid. And so now, do you have any contact with your family of origin? Do you have any contact with your mom or stepdad or your brother? Like, what happens there? Because you're just thrust out into your grandparents' home.
So basically, I had to finish out my senior year, so I got to see my brother at school. Basically, we'd always been very close, and now, my brother's missing me. I'm missing my brother. It was just terrible, terrible, lonely feeling of like you're used to always having this sidekick, and then you're on your own. Like, to the point where I'm so close with my brother. Like, sometimes, I don't know if it's like growing up and watching TV. Sometimes growing up and watching so many hours of TV together that you're always used to them here. Like, sometimes I catch myself like, he's like right here with me. So then you go from that to having to figure out your life. So basically, I was able to graduate high school, in spite of them, because they did very little to help out. They used to get me the train tickets to go back and forth to school. So basically, they decide after my senior year that there was a mass migration of people here in New Jersey, of witnesses in New Jersey, to this western Florida town of Cape Coral. So basically, the way my brother describes it was they sold everything up here, and they didn't want my brother to end up like me. So they just take my brother down to Florida. I'd never been separated from him for more than like days. Obviously, living at my grandparents' house, we weren't living in the same house anymore, but I could still see him at school. So then they take my brother. That was really hard. He was down there for a couple of years. His story ended up under similar circumstances. He lives right across the hall now, but he definitely didn't stay in the organization. So it was just trying to get jobs. I had a scholarship to go to college, but I felt that since I had gone to a vocational school, I don't think I was very like college prepared. And I had always done well in school, but I don't know if it was everything that had gone on and I just mentally couldn't concentrate on college. So I started working, working warehouse, whatever job like I needed to do to make ends meet. I drove hearses. I worked in warehouses. I sold DVD players and surround sound units out of the back of vans. I did I went for any job interview I could go on, and it was just learning on the fly. It turned out well. I'm very fortunate to have, the family that I had that helped me out. Because without them, it could have gone very badly. And then I ended up doing what I do now. I worked for, a water company, a utility company. And I have a career now, it's very different than how I started.
Absolutely. First of all, congratulations on hustling enough to make something of yourself. That's cool. Hard work can pay off. But also, I just want to touch on, so we've talked a lot about the family you came from. And you said you were thankful for your family, I guess, that's never been witnesses or whatever the case, that you came out to. So how did they kind of rally around you? Obviously, your grandparents did, but how did people kind of rally around you, or how have they shown up for you in ways that have helped? Because there's probably other people out there who are listening. There might be people who are listening today that maybe they are the family member and they have some witness family and they're curious, like, how can I help, or be there for somebody? What did they do that really made an impact on you?
And you have to realize, like, my uncles, aunts, they all had young kids at the time. I imagine now that as an adult, I look at things now with the lens of an adult, and I say, okay, you're working, you have your own family. Now you have this nephew that, your sister just threw out into the street. So I started living with my grandparents. They used to try to get me rides to train station, rides to things like, jobs, like help me out in that way, giving me advice. You don't realize when you're going through it, because your survival instincts kick in. And one thing that I do want to say, yeah, it's like really scary in the beginning, getting out there into the world, especially the worldview that you were instilled with. But it does, like we said, it does get better. And it's terrifying, and then when you're in it and in the trenches, so to speak, you don't realize how till maybe years later, like, wow, like my heart was completely broken. I was walking around with just brokenhearted, sad, just, this is life now, just having to figure it out. And then going back, like not having my brother around is, I remember the last time, he's like, before they left for Florida, just saying goodbye to him and like, I'll see you. And I wouldn't see him for like another 5 years after that. It was just so incredibly hard. So it was just lose him, not living in the same house after I had to leave, and then lose him again. It was hard. It was hard. And then you're sending him out on his own to live with people that are horrible people. And realizing all this stuff, and it's hard. It's hard. It was very hard.
So how did,
like I said, to my family,
yeah,
like they jumped in. Like I used to have to. My first job I got was working at Johnny Rockets in the mall, and I was a bus boy, and you had to throw out the trash at the end of the night. And I remember just, doing my work. And my grandfather, when I used to work late, he found out that I was taking the bus, like to get home, like late at night from the mall. Every night, when I would be working late, taking out the trash, you'd see him walking up and down, whistling, waiting for me. And I'd look up and he'd give me that big smile, and people don't know the little things, those little moments that sometimes a family member, those little things that may seem insignificant, when you're feeling low, like you've never felt before, and you see something like that, and you experience something like that, and they smile at you, maybe, give it one more day. Give it one more day. Just come on, it's going to get better. It's going to get better. And just stuff like that, where they have no idea, maybe because I didn't express it, but they saved me. They saved me, and thank you. Like, I could live 100 lives and I can never repay them.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think that's such a great contrast. When you look at it, your grandfather, let's just take that one moment, but your grandfather took an interest in you and was like, all right, how can I help? He knew enough. He found out that you were taking this bus, and then he showed up and he was there for you. And you contrast that with parents in the witness organization. A lot of times they'll be for you if you're doing what they want you to do, which is going to the meetings and blah, blah, blah. If you're doing that stuff, they'll be for you in ways, they'll be there for you. They still kind of expect you to do it on your own. There's a lot of independence there. But would they have shown up for you at your job so that you didn't, end up in that situation like your grandpa did? They weren't about that life. They're only about the witness life. That's what they care about. Nothing else really exists. It's just, are you going out in service? Are you going to the meetings? Blah, blah, blah. They don't see you. But your grandfather was like, I see you. I see there's a need here. I see some way I can help brighten your day, and I'm going to do it. And that was about you, not him. And that's a contrast. Whereas a lot of times witness families, all about them. They're all about, are you reflecting me? He was saying, I see you and who you are. Has nothing to do with me, but I love you enough that I'm going to jump in and I'm going to take care of you in this way and help. And that's just such a beautiful contrast on such a simple thing.
Definitely.
And it's awesome that you can feel that appreciation. Since you've been out now for how long?
To October 29, 2004. So it's been
about 16 years.
Yeah, it's like 16 years now.
Yeah. So 15, 16 years. It's just kind of, you don't have to go into great detail, but just how's life been for you in this past 15 or 16 years? Have you any lessons that you've learned you'd like to share, or anything any particular stories you'd like to share that you think might help somebody out there?
It just, not being, the worldview that they give you, it leaves you very scared and not, trusting of other people. And then you should always have a level of distrust, like logically, but it's a lot of times not as bleak and nasty as they make it out to be. People are genuinely good most of the time. I traveled, I was fortunate enough to, leave at a young age and, have a life. I got to work in this awesome field, got to travel. I used to do street service in this one town, the town I live in now. We used to walk around this downtown and as kids and do street work, walk to people walking around on the street. And there was a Harley dealership in the downtown. And I remember going into the Harley dealership with my suit and tie on. And I was like, one day I'm going to have a Harley. Like one day I'm going to have a motorcycle like this. So then fast forward, I'm working, already out of it. So I saved up all the money and I bought that Harley.
Oh,
and
awesome.
It means so much more to me than just like a motorcycle, like just this. It's so much more than just this material thing. And I got into riding, and I've gotten to do so many things that I could have never dreamed about if I had stayed. This beautiful life I had, maybe I don't have a mother and a father, but I have this amazing family that backs me up, supports me 100%. Amazing friends, like the friends you meet along the way that become family, because those first couple of years, you still have that indoctrination in you. That's like a process of where that, like I said before, it's running in the background. And sometimes you flicker in between thinking it's real and it's not real. And you're like, well, maybe I just couldn't live that way. And it is real. And you think there's a series of things that you have to work through. And what I recommend to people in the same situation is seek out real knowledge, like books. There's so many self-help books, podcasts out there. And that's how I stumbled upon you. Because I remember 2006, 2007, I remember I got a laptop and I said, I'm going to start looking up stuff about this organization. And I started going down the rabbit hole, so to speak. And I remember I found the book. I forget the name of the author. I'm Perfect, You're Doomed.
Yes. I don't know the author. I can't think. Is it a woman who wrote it?
Yes, it is a woman.
I can't think of her name right offhand, but I've heard it's really good. I haven't read it.
I read the book then, and it was, refreshing. At that time, there wasn't any podcasts or anything. That wasn't a thing. So it was just so refreshing to see like, oh, somebody else went through this. And then for a lot of years, I just buried this stuff. And I said, you know what? That was just my life. Then I have this awesome life now. I don't want to. So I buried it. So fast forward into like the era of podcasts and everything. And I was at work one day and I said, there has to be there's a podcast about literally everything. So there has to be an ex-Jehovah's Witness out here that's doing a podcast. Has to be. So I go on my phone, I pulled, and then Shun came on. And I said, okay, I'm going to listen to this. So then I listened to My J-Dub Life complete. I devoured all of the Shun podcasts. And this is something I've told you. When you're hearing these stories, I sometimes find myself having to pause, from the heaviness of the stories, and it brings up stuff that you're going through. But it also, totally lost my train of thought. You realize, you try that there's something there, and that you should dig at yourself and process what you went through. Because there was things that I heard in people's stories of, like, for example, like where they would behave in a certain way and wouldn't like once they were out, like where it comes to like partying a lot or drinking a lot, you try to compensate when you're out in the world of like, you want to experience everything. Some people do. Well, I was always like, party like a rock star through my 20s. And you learn, and some people learn that way. But it was through finding this podcast that I realized that this needs to be looked at and gone through.
Well, I'm glad you found the podcast, both of them, Shunned, This JW Life. I'm glad that you found that book so long ago too, because I'm in awe of the people who left, back before the internet age. Like, how in the world did you leave and heal? Because there weren't many books way back when. There weren't support groups necessarily. Like now, today we have Facebook groups and
exactly.
Forums. We have podcasts and YouTube channels and books and art. There are artists out there. You got Cliff with his music. You got all these people who are doing different things. And there's a culture an ex-witness culture being created. Whereas back then there was nothing. And I'm glad that you at least, found that book to help you to realize you weren't alone. Somebody else had lived that life too. And
you're not crazy. That's another thing. And you're not crazy, because they make it seem like the people that leave are unstable. Look, so-and-so left and immediately got cancer. See what happens? You leave the protection of Jehovah. Like, it's this crazy. You don't know it, and maybe you don't believe it because outwardly, but it's deep. It's running in there, and you're not. It's making you react in a way, and you're not understanding. But now, by hearing other people, and hopefully that's, one of the big reasons why I wanted to do this, is because I feel like it's my turn, in the sense that so many stories help me in this process. Hearing everybody's story helped me so much. If I can reach at least one person going through a hard time, whether they're in it and having to hide who they really are. Like, I had this need to want to be me. And I hated that I had to lie. And all I wanted to do was live in the world and not hide who I was, and not have to lie about where I was, who I was with. Just wanted to be normal. And I think that's a normal human quality. I mean, it's just like this whole shunning thing is not natural. It's not natural at all.
No, it's not. It's psychological manipulation, just like everything when we were in was psychological manipulation. That's all they have to offer. is constantly trying to manipulate you to get you to do a thing. They don't care why you come back. They just want you back. Even if they have to steal your family from you. However, they weaponize the family. They weaponize anything that's normal in life that people have, your sexuality, your curiosity about life, your family, whatever. They weaponize it all so that they can use it against you to try to get you to conform and come back to be what they want you to be. And it's a shame because it costs people so much. Since you have been out for a while, just to ask, is there anything that you'd like to share? Like, do you have any dreams or anything that you're looking forward to? Or do you have any parting shots, anything you'd like to leave anybody with at the end of your interview?
Basically, just hang in there. It's a process. It's not all going to happen in a day. And reach out, talk to people. You'll be surprised. A lot of people are willing to listen, help. The way they frame it, like, I don't want to bother anybody, but you're not bothering. The people that really care about you are going to be there for you. As far as dreams, my dream has always been to be a writer. So I feel like that was definitely, I was silenced for a long time. I look forward to getting my writing out there, writing my story, maybe come out with a book of my own one day. And just living authentically is really all I wanted to do. And that's what I get to do now. And that is priceless to me.